It's another Shameless reunion as William H. Macy guest stars as an old classmate of Dan and Roseanne. So let's talk the Connors. Hey guys, Dan here. This is Dan Reviews It. Welcome to the Connors review for the latest episode. We are now in the second half of the season. We took about a month off after the early December episode in the fall, and now ABC is starting up their sort of second half of the season, as it were, the winter/spring, and we are right in the middle, really, of that season. Episode 11, 2 More Years and a Stolen Rose is the name of this one, and like I mentioned up top, it is a Shameless reunion. What that means is, yes, Emma Kenny, who plays Darlene's daughter Harris, was on the TV show Shameless for a long time. I think probably for the whole run of the series. And this is now the third Shameless alum that has made their way onto this program. And for a little while, I wasn't sure if we were actually going to get a scene with the two of them, but the tag scene at the end, we do see that. And there's, look, it's a little bit of a corny joke or whatever for her to open the door and say, "Oh, don't I know you?" But it turns out because he's rich, he does this commercial in his Speedo because he owns like a pool company. And so she's like, "Oh yeah, that's where I know you from." So yeah, it was kind of funny, but very expected, I think. But anyway, before we launch into the specifics of this episode, even though I've already started to talk a little bit about them, I want to welcome you to Dan Reviews It. We do the Connors reviews every single week that there is a new episode of the show, and I even have some old Roseanne season reviews up as well that I did a few years back when the reboot happened. So you can check all of that out, and consider subscribing as well. Would love to have you aboard as one of my subscribers here. All right, so let's get into 2 More Years and a Stolen Rose. We've already talked about William H. Macy, but I think we'll put him and his storyline on the back burner for a moment because the episode title starts with 2 More Years. So we'll start with that portion. And this is both written and directed by vets of the Connors and Roseanne. Jody Margolin Hahn is the director here, and she does several episodes every season. We've already talked about her a couple of times here. And the Bruces, Bruce Rasmussen and Bruce Kaplan, are the writers of this one. So, really, we have a lot of talk about this new house that Darlene and Ben are now living in, but we didn't have any scenes there in this episode. For whatever reason, Darlene, Ben, and Becky, even though they are living at that new house, are at the old Connor place in this entire episode every time we see them. But Becky is trying to figure out what her plan is for her future. She wants to be a counselor. She obviously, her own alcohol addiction was a big part of some of the earlier seasons of the Connors. So, and of course, her mother, Roseanne, the character, died of opioid addiction. So she wants to enter that sort of universe, but of course she needs some further schooling to do that, and she realizes that 2 years of living with Darlene and Ben and saving up some money is not going to cut it. She's going to need more than that, more time. So she comes to Darlene, and Darlene says basically no, which well, we'll get into it in a second, but essentially they have not a fight necessarily, but a conversation in which, Darlene basically says, you're being a little unfair. I need time alone with Ben at some point, and we agreed to do this temporarily. So she talks to Ben about it later in the episode, and they come up with a plan to save a little bit of Becky's rent every month, and then after 2 years, give it back to her, what they've saved, and say, here you go, venture out into the world and do your thing with the money we've been saving for you, sort of in secret. But Darlene lets the cat out of the bag there because she just can't really express to Becky that she knows she'll be okay without really spilling the beans on all that. So that was sort of how they decided to resolve that issue, so that they will get their alone time after the 2 years, that Becky will move on, and her and Beverly Rose can get their own place at that point. So here's the thing. I mean, Darlene is out of work right now, and she is struggling with money. So in my mind, I know that they had sort of this arrangement, okay, just 2 years, but in my mind, I don't know, renters bringing money into the place is never, well, I shouldn't say never a bad thing. I've certainly had my run of bad roommates, but, these ladies are sisters, and her and Ben get along, obviously, and it's, some free or cheap childcare for Beverly Rose. So to me, it seems like it would work out for everybody, that if she does want to stay longer, that's okay. I can understand Arlene's position in that, she's been sort of, crashing at her dad's place for a long time. Like, she's not been on her own that much either. For a time she was living with her kids, I guess, in Chicago, before the reboot happened. But, for the most part, she's been never really alone with her husband, whether it was David, originally, because she got pregnant. I think she was pregnant for the wedding, right? From the old Roseanne days. And then we have, Ben now, and they haven't really had any alone time either, because they were either living with Dan or moving into this new house with Becky and Beverly Rose. So from that aspect, it makes sense. But look, Darlene's out of work. We don't know when she's going to find work. We assume, okay, within the next 2 years. But even if it takes her, 6 months or a year to find work, that's still, 6 months back in pay, and a year back, that she's behind now. And so in my mind, I thought she was being a little bit unfair to Becky. I know I've been harping lately on some of these Darlene episodes and her interactions with people and her decision making, and I don't know. It seems to me like they are making the character a little bit less likable than I would like her to be. I mean, I know she's always been a little bit, hard around the edge, but I don't know. I just, when they had that conversation, I understood her position a little bit, but at the same time, I've been hurting for money for sure. And it just, to me, it makes sense to keep, that money flow coming in, especially if you're not sure where your next paycheck is coming from. So that was sort of my take on that. I'm just not sure that I got where she was coming from completely, but I like the resolution. I like, how they handled that. All right, so before we move on to the William H. Macy stuff, I will say that we did not see Mark in this episode. He's been fairly absent on and off this whole season, but we also didn't, of course, see Mary. We've seen her, I think, in one episode this whole season, but yet she's, is still in the opening credits. Don't ask me why. We talk about this all the time. So they were both absent from this episode, but everybody else, had something to do here. And Louise, Katie Seagal's character, featured prominently as well, even though she's not quite a full-time cast member. But anyway, the whole William H. Macy thing. So he comes into town because one of the beloved teachers of Lanford High School has passed away. And so Dan and Louise and Jackie and, all of these people, of course, knew her. And although Louise asks about her, so I guess maybe she didn't have her as a teacher, but she did go to the school. So I thought it was a little odd she asked about her. But, look, I'll be honest. There's definitely a whole lot of teachers I can look at in my yearbook, and I'm not nearly as old as them, and I don't remember them. If I didn't have them in a particular class, I really probably don't know who they are, unless maybe my best friend had them or my brother had them. So I understand, I guess, why Louise doesn't quite remember her. But yeah, so they talk about her. And this is a really Roseanne heavy episode in terms of mentioning her character and stuff, because this William H. Macy character, Smitty, has hit it big. He is a multimillionaire. He's looking at maybe getting some sort of medical center going in the Chicago area or the Lanford area. Okay, that's awesome. So he's got money, and it's revealed early on that he had a thing for Roseanne. He basically took Roseanne to the prom, and Dan took her home, and started that whole courtship. So he has had a chip on his shoulder ever since. Louise mentions some money issues that Dan has been having in terms of, keeping the house afloat. And so Smitty offers to help, loans him $6,000, but first embarrasses him at the Lobo. We see the Lobo for the first time in a little while. I'm not sure if we've seen it before in the Connors, but of course that was I think we have, but it was a classic haunt, of course, back in the Roseanne days, so kind of cool to sort of bring that back. But Smitty basically embarrasses him and says, oh, I haven't seen this guy in decades, and the first thing he does is hit me up for a loan, like, come on, whatever, and that kind of thing. So Dan obviously did not take very well to that, and basically wants to beat the crap out of him. And, of course, that's sort of the old Dan. We used to see that all the time on the Connors. Whenever there was an issue, he would resolve it with his fists. And so obviously William H. Macy is not going to do that. He's a little bit of a, a nerdly character, not as strong. So he offers up $2,000 to anyone that will basically stand in his place and have a fight with Dan. And this is a sort of a weird callback, I think. But there was a fight in, I don't even know what season it was. You guys will tell me in the comments. You're better, I think, with this, or you can look it up. But early on, I would say second or third season, probably. This loudmouth at the Lobo, really, really shooting his mouth off, being obnoxious. And Dan sucker punches him and ends up going to jail at the end of the episode. Very, very funny. Oh, no, well, maybe that was when he punched Mark. I forget. He's been in a lot of fights. So maybe I'm wrong on that. But anyway, I think he did. I think he was taken away in a cop car from that episode. But anyway, they got the actor back. I only know him. He was in an episode of Cheers. He worked for Norm. And I think maybe he had a minor role on a sitcom around that time, around sort of the mid 90s. But I couldn't tell you his name. But they got the actor back. They showed, a 20-second flashback of that episode back in the day. And in the past, I've sort of teetered on, well, do we really need to do that? You really needed to do it for this character because I wouldn't have recognized him otherwise. And, he looks a bit different after 30 years. He looks young. I'll give him that, for his age, but I wouldn't have recognized him necessarily, unless they showed that clip. So I'm okay with it. It was, really 15 seconds probably, maybe even less of just showing Dan basically, hitting him. And then we know, oh, okay, this is that guy. So sort of an odd callback, like a one episode sort of nothing character. But, all right, in the tradition of let's keep things, canon and let's, have some more old actors and actresses that were on the original show return for a scene or two. All right, it's fine. But anyway, so that was the end of that character. But then at the funeral for this woman, her husband gave the students letters that they had written basically to their future self. And Jackie's was very funny. She was going to marry Donny Osmond, so it was all about that. And then, that gave her some laughs in this episode. But Dan's basically was like, hey, don't be a deadbeat like your father. Be a good man, a good stand-up man. Provide for your family. Be someone who can be counted on, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he realizes that, this jealousy that he's had all episode for Smitty is for naught. He won. He has the family. Smitty, he has his money, but he wanted Roseanne. Obviously, Dan took that. In his letter, it talks about how he wants Louise. And obviously, Dan now is married to Louise. So, he's beaten him twice in that department, but just in the, in the all the ways that count sort of file, he has beaten him. And so, I thought that was a great message because it is true. And it's not like it's a brand new message. We've seen that in a lot of movies and TV shows over the years and just in our own lives, talking with friends and stuff, at least I have, thinking about, okay, well, maybe I don't have the most money in the world, or far, far, far from it really. But, but I've got a lot of great friends and some great family that, support me through anything. And I have that great bond with them. And that's something maybe money can't buy, I think is the message here. And look, this family, the Connors, has never had money, but they've also always figured it out. He does end up cashing the check. He pretends to sort of tear it up at the funeral, but that was just a cable reimbursement check or whatever for $2 that he tears up in as a symbol, but he had already cashed Smitty's check that morning. So good stuff there. All right. And then at the end, we have that tag scene with Emma Kenny and William H. Macy coming together. The whole "do I know you" thing. But basically, they kind of make up. And Dan says, look, you help me out. You always have friends here. But just know that, I've got what we all wanted in high school, and that's, to be happy. So yeah, in terms of the message, I really liked it in this episode. And it was never really, preachy or anything, but I think it's nice to see everyone bettering themselves. Becky obviously wants to be an addiction specialist, addiction counselor, so she's gonna, go to school with that. Dan obviously is, kind of living his best life. Louise took a couple of unintentional pot shots, I think, from Dan in this episode. Saying about how he kind of lost the most important thing to him and blah, blah, blah. And you're better than me because you have all this money and stuff. And Louise is trying to like rein it in, like, okay, dude, like we've already avoided a couple of fights today, so we're going to let that slide. But I'm standing right here, kind of thing. So that was good. So in terms of the MVP of the episode, I don't know. I guess I got to give it to John Goodman. He gave us some funny lines, but really when he was reading that letter, it was, I didn't necessarily get choked up, but it was another great acting scene from him, and sort of reminds us why Dan Connor is one of the great TV dads, TV parents of all time. He shows that yet again here. So I'll pick him for the MVP. In terms of the episode on the whole, I thought it was enjoyable. Maybe not as funny as some of the other ones. And again, I'm a little bit torn on the whole Darlene thing. I don't love what they're doing lately with her character, so I can't say that I'm loving that. But I do like the resolution of that plot line, where they decided to help Becky out, in sort of secret, and then she told her anyway. But so I will leave 2 more years and a stolen rose with a B. I could even go B plus on it. I thought it was pretty good. I don't know. Maybe we just had a couple of really good ones going into the winter break, and maybe I was looking for something a little funnier. I don't know. It had its funny moments for sure, but I think more maybe in the middle of the pack for the season so far. So I think a B is all right. All right. Next week there is another new episode, so we will see you then on Dan Reviews It. Thanks for watching. Bye.